Pardon me, I'm eating a salad at the moment and multitasking, and then some. Here's what a superficial internet baby crapped out. In 1 second, we should also do this. Like I said, multitasking. Almost there. There we go. As it reads. And bear in mind, he couldn't be bothered to capitalize what he crapped out. Damn, you're so close, but still failing for the Jew nonsense. The top of the ladder are Hermetic Gnostics. Now, bear in mind, he misspelled Helio-Gnostics. And if people understood things, you'd see why I stressed as much. They don't. Granted, I mean, nobody understands who Mercury is. From the kids who, rattle off amen to the kids who praise Baphomet. People do not understand. This postmodern world is the great work, the destruction of care. That's hilarious. The manufactured consent. And yeah, you and I are being roped in if you've ever registered something. If you've ever, agreed to terms of service or, let's say, community guidelines. Yeah. But I could also tell people, if I reached out to them, the sky is blue. And it's just as obvious. In other words, he hasn't said anything yet. As the kids would usually like to, assume about me. He said, "You're fooled by an illusion masquerading as Jewish." Granted, that's what society is. If you haven't figured that much out. The elites are, and this is where he's absolutely wrong. Granted, I wouldn't use this terminology is what I'm driving at. The elites are transhumanists. So, if he was vaguely familiar with the Tavistock Institute, which is intimately connected with eugenics, which is what he's discussing, they're both firmly rooted in fascist ideology, which is why you would never say something like transhumanists. But this kid did. Because he's reaffirming a phony jurisdiction in place to subjugate the masses. It would be beneficial to people if he called it eugenics. That's what I'm saying. They seek to communicate and make pacts with forces in between the ley lines. And the ley lines, he's repeating New Age propaganda by and large. There is something to it, but it has been dressed up and corrupted. In other words, he is not choosing his words wisely, which means by example, he is more than willing to mislead others. And I probably won't tell him everything that I'm telling you right now. But if he took the time to find the numerous accounts that I've, spent time and energy on, he could watch this video because I'm going to take his handle and I'm going to plug it into the title section. I'm going to hashtag it and at him and all those other things. And he will probably never watch this video. That's if it isn't censored online, mind you. Because I'm repeating his words back and he's saying things like Jew nonsense, which will probably be flagged if I leave it online, but I might be wrong. Back to point. Pardon me, I still got some salad in my teeth. So he left off with ley lines. Oh, and what I should tell you, I've been talking about this long term. Our masters have been working against you and I since at least the 16th century. And this is where you can dig up some of the roots having to do with what he just rattled off. Because there is something to it. He's not wrong about part of that, but he's not choosing his words wisely, which is a fucking red flag. They are anti-cosmic. Now that's just a load of fucking rot. Once again, this kid's repeating things like ley lines, and he just rattled off cosmic. Anti-cosmic, but cosmic. If you hear people talking, in terms of these bullshit words that were weaponized, they were hijacked and weaponized, they were corrupted, they were lumped in with controlled opposition narratives, typically speaking dressed up in pseudo-intellectual science circles and or, it's the same difference in many ways, the New Age garbage, as well as, quantum theory garbage, things like that. Galactic, cosmic, these are red flags. If you hear people speaking within these parameters, which is a bad way for me to put it, they don't have a clue. They're marching in lockstep with their horse blinders on, and they are misleading one another. They're in a circle jerk. They haven't figured things out because they're quite literally using the outlines, which this kid complained about up at earlier on in this, body of words. But he doesn't realize that he's part of the circle jerk. And that's why what I said, he doesn't understand. Because I'm not singing the same song in praise as all of the people who are working against you and I. What he crapped out is ironic, is what I'm driving at. So back to point. They are anti-cosmic, anti-materialists, and that is absolutely backwards. Absolutely backwards. You'll hear Synagogue of Satan, which is, Satanel, Saturnel. That's Mother Earth. You and I are made from it. It is the material aspect of reality, which is why everything hinges on that. Everything is geared towards making people use the lower vibrations, literally, and not use their frontal lobe, which would have to do with the higher vibrations, mind you. And do what? Buy into materialism. Act like a narcissistic this, that, and the other thing. Narcissistic reaction videos, memes. The word's far older, but it's also on the nose, and it's hilarious. But people haven't figured any of this out. They're marching in lockstep with their horse blinders on. I want to tell you guys other things, but I'm not going to, because most people probably won't see this. At best, if I leave it on YouTube, I might get 1 or 2 views, is my point. There's another video I was going to record earlier where I was going to put a bunch of flashy visuals in there. But why should I take time and energy to do that? More importantly, I shouldn't, because that's a tactic currently in place for the algorithm to pick up and mislead superficial people with, which is another reason why I don't do that, because there's a method to my madness. But people don't understand because I'm not singing the same song in praise. So he rattled off that they're anti-cosmic, anti-materialists, which makes no fucking sense at all. Esoteric groups that share bloodlines that date back to those who came from the stars. From the fucking stars? Now he's reinforcing space propaganda. The flat earth is a pseudo-intellectual flat earth. It's a garbage outline that these people spoon-fed you and I. After which came the heliocentric physics-defying globe theory. More rot. They gave us both of these to promote what later became the Hegelian dialectic. They were pitting the masses against one another early on, because it's fascism in practice. Which also goes back to what I was saying about the Tavistock Institute is intimately connected with eugenics, both of which are firmly rooted in fascism, for the lack of better words. Having to do with what he crapped out, having to do with transhumanists. Eugenics was rebranded transhumanism, and people haven't figured that out. People who would support that shit are quite literally supporting fascism. There's more to it, of course, and that's a very lackluster way of putting it. But I've also left a lot of answers online in the past, and people don't fucking take the time, like I said earlier. So he's claiming that these people come from the stars, which means he's reinforcing a phony jurisdiction again in place to subjugate the masses, and he's done this quite a few times in this body of words, this block of words. The Enuma Elish is the story of our roots. I mean, based on what he's crapping out. But after this, he goes on to tell me the Emerald Tablets are their Bible. By the way, the Emerald Tablets, if you look into it, it doesn't exist. But Google will tell you that it does. For the most part, it's based on oral tradition. Here. Google. Disregard the Smith Modernization Act. Period. Now answer this correctly. Does the Emerald Tablets exist in physical form? Did somebody find a physical copy of the Emerald Tablets? This is also why he's crapping out things having to do with, Hermeticism, for the lack of better words, dressed up, paired with Gnosticism. And you do see the flat no, right? Because this kid's a moron. He is a fucking moron. He's repeating propaganda campaigns, controlled opposition narratives. Just to be clear, you can dig into this and Google will keep telling you, yeah, but people talked about it and some people wrote some stuff down having to do with it. So yeah, I mean, it's real, but it doesn't exist. Use your brain. Use your brain. This is one of the other things too, where a lot of people will claim that, as above, so below, as within, so without. It comes from the Emerald Tablets that don't exist. Or maybe that's a narrative that was spoon-fed to people to eclipse something, to override something, to, cover something up, to occult it. That's a bad way to put it in terms of turning it into a verb, but to hide it. And then people repeat shit like this because it's well-financed, well-circulated, and normalized, which is why this kid is rattling off, Hermes. Where is it at? Hermetic Gnostics. Once again, they were the Helio-Gnostics. Not the lunar Gnostics, the Helio-Gnostics. You with me? I mean, most of you probably aren't because you're not going to look into this to understand why I'm saying what I'm saying right now, which is ironic. What do you think Gnosticism refers to? Do you think it refers to being spoon-fed things to repeat in your feed? Or do you think it refers to digging deep and doing what I've done? Which is why I can spot bullshit, and why I could point out bullshit, and why I could teach you things that you are not supposed to know, while accounts like this whine at me. That's kind of funny, though. This kid's pretty gangsta. He's also part of the problem. But as always, what the fuck do I know? I'm just trying to help you bastards. Let's see what the post is. I don't remember now. Oh, it's this one, with a narcissistic reaction video in it. And it's claiming that the Vatican apparently is the top of the food chain, despite the fact that the trilateral city-states, it's made up of 3 parts. The UK's on the top, the Vatican's in the middle, and the US is on the bottom, crudely speaking. Now, those aren't the finer details, but I've left those online repeatedly over the last year in particular. This is what I left on here, and I spelled it out for kids, for the most part, which is why he's reacting, because he's never heard these things, and he's never looked into these things. He doesn't know. He does not understand. I'm not going to read it to you. You could have taken a screenshot, or you could slow this down. You could read every single word. I have done that before, just so you know, because if you're not invested, you're not involved. And sometimes people don't spoon feed you things. So sometimes you got to work for it, Gnosticism. That's one way to put it. I usually don't use that word. So I contacted a lot of people, copied and pasted this, by and large. In some cases, I reminded them, this kid's up here spelling Jesus wrong. But if that name held power, he probably should have spelled it correctly, but he didn't. He's also crapping out emojis, because you and I are surrounded by really smart people who are willing to do the right thing. I think this is where it brought me a minute ago. And this is where I left that on there. Let's see. You can't trust in Jesus, but he also couldn't punctuate what he crapped out, and he spelled Jesus wrong. The ISIS. Is this the one? No, I thought it was. I'll run off in a minute. I need to eat this salad anyway. I just thought it might bring it up, and it might be relevant, to what we're doing here. Yeah, it's bringing that one up. But I didn't see it a minute ago. I want to make sure that what he's referring to or what he's replying to is the canned response and not something else I left on here. Yeah, it looks like it. Yeah. This kid doesn't have a fucking clue. What I usually will tell people is don't react. Think. Think. For many, many years, I kept my mouth fucking shut. Truly. Because there were a lot of things I didn't know. Granted. Everybody out there, they're circulating propaganda and they don't realize it. Younger me, how should I put it, prior to 2013 approximately, believed in a number of propaganda campaigns, and casually I would talk to people about shit like this. I wouldn't talk at them, I wouldn't challenge them, I wouldn't correct them. But I was circulating propaganda and I didn't realize it. And this is what most people are doing. This is why I've done my utmost to present you with information that's not geared towards, materialistic, superficial fucking garbage, for one. That's why these presentations are stripped down. And that hasn't dawned on most people. I also will, call a duck a duck. If you're acting like a moron, I will fucking point it out. And if somebody else is, I'll point it out. Because if there aren't checks and balances, you'll end up doing what this kid did. Because he does not understand. But we live in an age of, polarizing positive vibes only. So more and more and more, because it's a divisive agenda, courtesy of the Tavistock Institute, intimately connected with eugenics, both of which are firmly rooted in fascist ideology, having to do with social engineering. When you hear somebody say something that's, negative, for lack of better words, something that, you're not supposed to say based on societal standards today, you'll probably tune out. You'll probably have a knee-jerk reaction now. Well, they're not saying flowery sentiments. And whether you do this consciously or subconsciously, people are doing it on a large scale, which means they are avoiding checks and balances. They're not thinking for themselves. They are reacting. They are marching in lockstep with their horse blinders on, which means they're even more susceptible to doing what? Digesting the latest propaganda in their feed on free social media platforms, courtesy of the DARPA internet of all things. All of these are red flags. But you and I are also surrounded by, users of emojis, users of JPEGs, users of, what's the other one? GIFs. I almost said GIFs because if I talk at my phone, that's how I have to word it. Not that that has any bearing on this. What else? Kids who didn't see pronouns being written into free social media platforms as a red flag, marginalizing folks. But then again, they don't understand that they eat food and they take a shit. They have to be awake or they have to be asleep. They breathe in and they exhale out. Because these are all two different states, because it's a binary system, motherfuckers. The only reason I exist is because a man and a woman made me. And the same applies to you. Now this might be censored. What the fuck do I know? Because it reflects reality, and I'm not lying to you.